Mr. Snitzel's Cookies by Jane Flory. Oh my God, 1950? Mr. Snitzel swept out the last crumb from his neat little bake shop and dusted off the empty shelves. "We might as well close the shop," said Mr. Snitzel to his cat. "There's nothing left to sell and nothing left to give away. If only I had a few raisins or some cherries or even some flour. I could make something nice for our supper, but I'm all out of everything." When Mr. Snitzel went out to fasten the front door, he waved to Mimi, who made such beautiful hats in her shop across the street. He waved to Mr. and Mrs. Manypenny in the grocery store next door, but they were too busy to notice him. Mimi called, "Why are you closing so soon, Mr. Snitzel?" "Because I have nothing left, Mimi." "Oh," said Mimi. "You have given away all your lovely pastries, and now you have no money to buy more raisins and sugar. I told you it would happen some day. What will you do tomorrow?" Mr. Snitzel did not know, and he was very sad. As he stood in front of his bakery, he saw a thin, shabby man come up the street. He had a thin, shabby dog, and both of them looked as though they hadn't a friend in the world. The shabby man stared in the Manypenny's grocery store for a moment. Then he opened the door and went inside. In a short time he came hurrying out again. Mr. Snitzel could hear Mrs. Manypenny's angry voice. "And don't come bothering around here again. We have no time for tramps, and no food either." The shabby man and his dog looked sadder than ever. As they passed, Mr. Snitzel said, "Would you like to share my supper? I believe I can find a bone for your dog, too." The shabby man was so pleased he could only nod his head. They went through the bakery and into the room in back where Mr. Snitzel lived. A warm fire was burning in the stove, and the baker had put a tea kettle on to boil. He pulled a chair close to the fire and made the shabby man comfortable. When the tea was ready, Mr. Snitzel divided his last cinnamon bun with his guest. He poured a saucer of milk for the cat and gave the thin little dog a nice bone. When they all finished their scanty supper, Mr. Snitzel turned down the covers of his bed and found the stranger a nice warm nightshirt. He tucked the shabby man into bed, and then, because he was very tired, he sat in the rocker and fell asleep. When the shabby man awoke, it was morning. The sun was shining and the cat was purring. The copper kettle sang a steamy little song, and Mr. Snitzel looked almost cheerful. "I should be sad," thought Mr. Snitzel, "for goodness knows how I will manage without anything at all to bake with. But it is such a beautiful day that I'm sure something nice will happen." After breakfast, the shabby man said goodbye. "You are a good man, Mr. Snitzel. I can't repay your kindness in money, but I do have a gift for you just the same. It is a wish come true. Whatever you do first in the bakery this morning, you will do all day long. But remember, use it wisely. Give some away, but sell some too." Then the shabby man tipped his hat, and he and his dog went down the street. Mr. Snitzel didn't pay much attention to the man's odd words, because he was busy wishing with all his heart for just a little flour and sugar. "I wish I had enough things to make just one cookie for little sick Peter," he thought. Even though he knew his flour pail was empty, he looked again just in case he had overlooked a spoonful in the bottom. When he took off the lid, Mr. Snitzel could hardly believe his eyes. The flour pail was full. He opened the sugar bin, and it was full too. The big jar of raisins, the cinnamon hearts, the bowl of nuts, everything he needed to make cookies was there. Mr. Snitzel reached for his apron and his high baker's hat and his mixing bowl. He stirred up the cookie dough. He rolled it out on his big board and began to cut out the cookies. He made circles and flowers and running horses, cats and dogs and chickens. Each cookie was prettier than the last. They were the nicest cookies he had ever made. Mr. Snitzel was so happy that he made up a little song. "Wish come true, wish come true. It happened to me, it could happen to you. There isn't much you have to do to make your dearest wish come true." When the good smell of the baking cookies blew up and down the street, people started coming into the shop to buy. But when Mr. Snitzel tried to wait on them, his hands wouldn't do anything but make more cookies. So the customers found bags and filled them with cookies and then put the money in a dish on the counter. Mr. Snitzel went right on singing and making cookies, and people came and went in crowds. Mimi closed her hat shop for the day and ran across the street to help. She swept the shop and made change. She put more wood on the fire to keep the oven hot. When Mr. and Mrs. Manypenny looked out of their grocery store and saw all the people going in and out of Snitzel's bake shop, they didn't know what to think. They hurried over to find out what had happened. "It's very simple," explained Mr. Snitzel happily, all the while rolling out more cookies. "Yesterday my bake shop was empty, and I had nothing to sell. Then a queer, shabby little man came along, and I gave him some supper and a place to sleep. And when he left this morning, he told me that whatever I did first in the bakery, I would do all day long. You can see all I have done all day long is make cookies." "Go after the old tramp," Mrs. Manypenny shouted to her husband. "We'll get some magic, too. I'll cook a big dinner for him and let him sleep in our best bedroom." Mrs. Manypenny ran down the street to find the shabby man. Actually, that was Mr. Manypenny. Mrs. Manypenny closed the grocery store for the rest of the day and started to fix dinner. All the while she was planning what a wonderful wish come true they would have. Soon she saw Mr. Manypenny coming up the street with the shabby man and his dog. She welcomed them into the house. "You must forgive us for not inviting you to stay last night," she said, "but we had visitors and there was no room. Besides, we had no idea you were a magician." "Hush," whispered her husband. "We aren't supposed to know that." The shabby man said nothing at all. He just smiled when he saw the long table piled with good things to eat. "I don't suppose you had a dinner like this at Snitzel's, did you?" asked Mrs. Manypenny. "Oh, no," answered the shabby man. "We had only tea and a cinnamon bun and a large helping of kind-heartedness." When the Manypennys took the shabby man to his bedroom, they said, "Poor Snitzel has nothing as fine as this. See these thick, warm blankets? Mr. Snitzel covered me with a blanket of friendship, and I was warm as toast all night," said the shabby man. In the morning, when the shabby man came downstairs, he found Mr. and Mrs. Manypenny waiting for him. They had been wide awake all night planning how to spend their gold pieces. "Did you sleep well? Were you warm enough? Was the bed comfortable?" they asked. "Indeed, everything was fine," said the shabby man. "And now I want to give you a wish come true in return." "Yes, yes," said the Manypennys eagerly. "When you go into your grocery store this morning, choose wisely what you do first, for that is what you will do all day." Mr. and Mrs. Manypenny could hardly bother to say goodbye to the shabby man because they were so anxious to go into the store. "Go to the cash register, quick, and start counting money," said Mrs. Manypenny. "No, first we must make a place to put all the money." Mrs. Manypenny emptied a big box of carrots to make room for the gold pieces. "We'll need more room than that," said Mr. Manypenny, and he took a broom and began to sweep a clear place on the floor. But he found that as soon as he took hold of the broom handle, his fingers stuck tight, no matter how hard he tried to let loose. All he could do was sweep and sweep, and though Mrs. Manypenny scolded and shouted and stamped, she spent the whole day emptying the carrot box. And to make matters worse, all day long they could hear Mr. Snitzel singing his little song in the bakery next door. "Wish come true, wish come true, it happened to me, it could happen to you. There isn't much you have to do to make your dearest wish come true." The end.